Hello everyone and happy Mother's Day! Welcome to yet another surprise episode in the Trail Went Cold's feed today, and this one is titled Deadly Devotion, Motherhood, and Mayhem. This is the fourth collaborative effort organized by Shane Waters of the Foul Play podcast, where a number of true crime podcast hosts, including yours truly, would each take turns talking about a case which fit the episode's theme. We've done special episodes like this in the past for Halloween, Valentine's Day, and Easter, so now we're releasing one for Mother's Day. You'll find a list of all the participating podcasts in the show notes, and in case you're wondering, my particular section is about an hour and 43 minutes into this episode, where I'll be talking about a pretty infamous story about a mother who poisoned her own family. So without any further ado, I hope you all enjoy Deadly Devotion, Motherhood, and Mayhem.
Greetings, friend, and welcome to a chilling Mother's Day collaboration podcast. I'm your guide, Shane Waters, from the Foul Play Crime Series podcast, and together, we'll be delving into the shadows of motherhood on this eerie adventure. 13 skilled podcasters will join us as we explore the darker side of true crime stories, each with an unsettling connection to motherhood. All participating podcasts are listed in the show notes. When you hear one you like, I suggest you go find them. Before we embark on our haunting journey, although Mother's Day is typically a time to honor the love and sacrifices of mothers, today we'll be exploring the twisted tales that lurk behind the scenes. As we explore these chilling stories, let's not forget that the role of a mother often embodies the ideas of protection and nourishment, of guiding and nurturing their children through life's challenges. However, as we'll discover, that's not always the case. Sometimes, even in relationships that once flourished with happiness and warmth, things can take a dark turn, causing everything to fall apart and crumble. It's a sobering reminder that the complexity of human relationships and the depths of the human psyche can lead to unpredictable and devastating outcomes. Now, let's begin our sinister journey. Our adventure starts in an abandoned garden, where overgrown vegetation casts dark shadows and a chilling wind whispers secrets through the trees. The once vibrant flowers have wilted, and the air is heavy with decay. As we make our way through the tangled underbrush, we encounter our first podcaster friend, Wendy, who joins me on Foul Play Crime Series to share a harrowing tale of motherhood gone awry.
It was a beautiful March day on the west coast of America. A German tourist was enjoying the magnificent views as he drove down Highway 1. He took regular stops to breathe in the fresh sea air and take photographs to preserve his memories. The coastline was truly spectacular, Highway 1 being a firm favourite for visiting tourists. Mile upon mile of unspoilt scenery on either side of the road. I have in fact done that drive many times myself, and it's not something I will ever get tired of seeing. But it's not always memorable for the right reasons. The road is narrow in places, it curves around the coastline like a snake, and you are often close to the edge of the cliffs. And accidents happen. Maybe you lose concentration for a split second. Maybe you swerve to avoid an oncoming vehicle that is too close to you. It happens. And so when this gentleman spotted a car upside down on the ragged rocks below, as he stooped to take a photograph, he assumed that it was an accident.
Authorities arrived quickly, and rescuers descended down the rocks to the upturned vehicle. There was no movement. There were no cries for help. They arrived to silence. Inside the GMC Yukon XL were what appeared to be two women with the bodies of 3 children found nearby. They were all confirmed dead at the scene. What a terrible accident. A whole family gone.
Investigators began to try and piece together what had happened. A witness from a local campsite came forward to say that he believed he had seen the vehicle earlier in the evening. And then at around 3 a.m, he heard an engine revving and tyres on gravel. He got up to investigate, but it was too dark to see anything. As he returned to bed, he thought he heard cries for help, but assumed it was animals and went back to sleep.
Following the autopsies, the family were identified as the Harts. And this is when the investigation turned from an accident to a suspected murder-suicide. Jennifer, aged 38, had been driving the car. Her body contained high levels of alcohol. Sarah, also 38, had high levels of Benadryl in her body, as did those of their 3 adopted children who were found near the vehicle. Marcus, aged 19, and Jeremiah and Abigail, both aged 14. So what had happened that night?
As friends of the family heard the news, they just couldn't believe that it wasn't an accident. Jennifer and Sarah had an idyllic life with their 6 adopted children. Or so it appeared from the outside. And yes, you did hear that right. There were 6 children. So where were the other 3? An extensive search of the crash site discovered the bodies of Hannah, aged 16, and Sierra, aged 12, after a few days. But there was no sign of 15-year-old Devontae.
The scene and the data from the car was analyzed. It showed that Jennifer had pulled the car off Highway 1 onto a gravel turnout, about 70 feet away from the edge of the cliffs. She had then accelerated the vehicle to around 90 miles an hour before driving straight off the edge of the 100-foot cliffs, landing upside down on the rocks below. Killing herself, her wife, and their 6 children. There were no signs that she tried to break.
Jennifer and Sarah Hart met around 1998 at Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. They'd fallen in love and moved to Alexandria, Minnesota. In 2004, the couple decided to open their home and share their love with foster children. Their first daughter was 15 years old, and she told reporters that one day Jennifer and Sarah dropped her off for an appointment with her therapist and just never returned to collect her. She never heard from them again. In 2006, the couple adopted 3 siblings from Texas: Marcus, 7 years old, Hannah, 4, and Abigail, 2. Then just 2 years later, in 2008, they adopted 3 more siblings, again from Texas: Devontae, 5 years old, Jeremiah, 4, and Sierra, 3. Investigation Discovery said, quote, "The Hart tribe was now complete and they looked like the model of a progressive 21st century family. 2 white lesbian mothers and 6 adopted black children," end quote.
Jennifer stayed at home to look after the children while Sarah went to work. Jennifer was always on social media, posting photographs of the family, attending various events, and having adventures. The posts were always positive, portraying a tight-knit family unit full of smiles, fun, and cuddles. But the reality was very different. The children were all being abused.
The couple were reported to the authorities a number of times. In September 2008, a teacher noticed a bruise on Hannah's arm. Hannah told them that her mum had whipped her with a belt. No further action was taken, but all of the Hart children were taken out of school for a year by Sarah and Jennifer. Then in November 2010, teachers noticed signs of abuse on Abigail, then aged 6. Abigail said that her mum Jennifer had held her head under cold water and punched her. All of the Hart children were interviewed, and they said that they were regularly refused food and were often spanked and grounded. Sarah took the blame for Abigail's injuries. She was charged and convicted of misdemeanor domestic abuse and sentenced to 12 months community service and probation. It was at this time that all 6 of the Hart children were removed from school for good.
With nobody checking on the children's welfare, the abuse escalated. In 2013, the family moved to Oregon. Attendees at the music festivals that the family attended were concerned that the children looked small for their ages and reported that while in photographs, they were full of smiles. As soon as the camera was turned away, the children looked lifeless and acted like robots, doing whatever necessary to keep Jennifer happy. Jennifer convinced officials that there was nothing wrong and that people just liked to pick on them because they were different.
By 2017, the family were living in Washington, in a rural property next to Bruce and Dana DeKalb. Bruce and Dana said the children rarely left the house and that the blinds were always drawn. In 2017, at around 1:30 a.m., Hannah appeared at Bruce and Dana's door banging frantically, asking for help. Apparently, she said, quote, "Don't make me go back, they're racist and they abuse us," end quote. The couple was shocked, but before they could react, Jennifer had arrived to take Hannah home. The next morning, all 8 of the Hart family arrived at Bruce and Dana's house to apologise for the previous night's events, and Jennifer explained that the children had all come from mothers who abused drugs and had some issues. Dana told her father what had happened and he reported the Harts to the authorities, but no action was taken.
Things didn't improve for the Hart children, and just 8 months later, Devontae approached Bruce while he was cleaning his car and begged him for some food. Bruce couldn't see the poor lad starving, so helped him out. Devontae made Bruce promise not to mention this to his parents. After this first time, Devontae asked for food for himself and his siblings a few more times before Bruce and Diana reported the family to authorities again. A Child Protection Services worker visited the home, but there was nobody in. She left a card.
The following Saturday, March the 24th, Bruce and Dana noticed that the family's GMC Yukon was not in the driveway. That same morning at 3 a.m, Sarah had texted work to tell them she was too sick to come in. The last sighting of the Hart family alive was at a Safeway store in Fort Bragg, California, on the morning of Sunday the 25th of March. The next morning, their car was found, belly up on the rocks. Devontae's body has never been recovered.
With our hearts pounding, we venture deeper into the garden and discover a murky pond. The stagnant water is a stark reminder of the darker side of motherhood. Beside the pond, we find Brandon who shares a spine-chilling true crime story from their podcast, Music City 911.
A 911 dispatcher can get any number of types of calls when their phone rings. Most of the time, it's a very routine call like a traffic collision or someone wanting an ambulance for a person who's just passed out. But on occasion, we might get a call that no one wants to hear. A call in which children have been hurt or worse.
911, what are you reporting?
Hi, ma'am.
Hi, this is 911.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Please help me.
What address are you at? Okay, what's going on there?
My babies won't calm down. I've breastfed them. I formally fed them.
And what are they doing? And what are they doing?
They're not calming down.
What do you mean calming down?
They're not calming down.
Are they repeatedly crying?
Yes.
So they are conscious?
Yes.
Okay, and do you think they need medical attention?
Yes. I don't know what they want.
Okay. How many children do you have?
4.
Okay, and are they all 4 not calming down?
Yes.
Okay, what's going on there?
Yes, we need an ambulance immediately for 2 babies.
Okay, what's going on there? Okay, and what's going on with the babies?
They're bleeding right now. We need an ambulance immediately.
Where are they bleeding from?
The neck. We need an ambulance.
My partner is talking to them. Why are they bleeding? What happened to them?
I'm not sure. Send the ambulance immediately.
Okay.
Please.
I don't want them to die. I don't want them to die. No.
Don't say anything when they okay, baby? Don't say anything, okay?
Oh my God, something is so wrong there.
The dispatcher's last comments, "Oh my God, something is so wrong there," was 100% accurate. The initial caller, 29-year-old Christina Booth, called 911 just after 1 a.m. on a Sunday in January of 2015 in the community of Olympia, Washington. Well before the call was placed, Christina and her husband Thomas were enjoying a movie with some wine. Their 3 children, one of which at the time was 2 years old, and the other 2, twins that were 6 months old, were there in the house with the couple. Christina took the 2-year-old to bed when the twins started crying. During the 911 call, she said that the babies won't calm down, that she has breastfed them, formula fed them, and that they weren't calming down. Christina was diagnosed with postpartum depression. She was on a prescription medication that was supposed to help her with this. But the overall stress was too much for her, and she says she reached a breaking point. She had said that her husband, who served in the Army, often got annoyed at the children crying. Her solution to this was ghastly. She believed if she killed her children, that the house would be quiet again for her husband. After putting her 2-year-old in bed, she went to the dishwasher, grabbed a knife, and walked back to the 2-year-old's room, where she then slashed her throat. She covered up the 2-year-old completely, then moved to the twins and did the same with them. When police arrived, they found the 6-month-old twins laying on the couch, crying and covered in blood. The 2-year-old was found underneath the covers with dried blood all over her. They were all transported to a local hospital where surgery was performed, and after, all 3 survived. Christina was arrested and charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and then sentenced to 14 and a half years in prison, and was also ordered to desist from contacting her children after release.
We leave the pond and enter a desolate village where the laughter of children has been silenced. Shadows dance across the empty streets, hinting at the unspeakable horrors that once took place here. In the eerie silence of the village square, we encounter Pia and Alex, who share a terrifying tale from their podcast, Crimes from the East.
On May 23, 2012, a man discovered burnt skeletal remains in the Payne National Forest area outside Mumbai, India. These were the remains of 25-year-old Sheena Bora. Surely her mother was worried about her missing daughter, right? Well, in today's story, we will see how this mother may have helped put her own child in this horrific state. The story starts with Indrani Mukherjee, who grew up in Guwahati in the northeast of India as an only child. By 18, she had her daughter Sheena Bora and a son Mikhail with a young man. After a few years, Indrani was fed up with the stagnant life that seemingly was going nowhere. And so in 1993, when Mikhail was just a toddler, she abandoned them one fine day with her parents and moved to the big city, Kolkata. Indrani was naturally beautiful, with an extroverted personality to match. She charmed her way through social clubs and worked her way up the HR consulting industry. She met and quickly married a socialite, Sanjay Khanna, with whom she had another daughter, Alex. Did you have any thoughts so far?
Okay, so she had her 2 kids and was like, nah, I don't like these kids. And then she goes and has another one. So did she like this daughter? Like, what's going on? Did she treat this child better?
By all accounts, she absolutely loved this child. And it's rather unfair from the sounds of it, the way she abandoned her first 2 children and then completely doted on this child.
Okay.
Now, feeling restless yet again in 1997, Indrani moved on to Mumbai city, determined to find a partner with deeper pockets and higher ambition. She worked her charm and married a wealthy, influential TV network executive called Peter Mukherjee. By this time, Indrani's 2 children in Guwahati, Sheena and Mikhail, were living lonely lives, being cared for by ailing grandparents. Sheena expressed anger and sadness over her mother's abandonment in her journal.
So she's abandoned her 3rd daughter or not?
No.
But she remarried again.
Yes, she remarried and she took her daughter with her to her new home.
And does she have contact with the 2 children she left?
From what I read, no. She never contacted them. She never met them. She never really even checked on them. Sheena saw her mother's face in the newspaper one day in a wedding announcement with a famous TV executive, Peter Mukherjee. She wrote a letter asking to meet her mother. Indrani knew she had to respond and control the narrative because she had hidden her past from everyone. No one in Kolkata or Mumbai knew she had 2 children in Guwahati. In 2006, Indrani arranged for 18-year-old Sheena and 16-year-old Mikhail to meet her at a hotel. There she laid it out straight. They could stay with her in Mumbai, all expenses paid, if they agreed to lie to people and say that they were her siblings, not children. They begrudgingly agreed. Now, Indrani separated the siblings and she never really let them stay in touch. She weakened their bond. She barely paid their minimum expenses and often used money to control their actions. Now, this went on till one fine day in 2008 when Sheena met Peter Mukherjee's son Rahul from his previous marriage. They fell completely in love. They began a relationship which Indrani was completely against. She was perhaps jealous of her daughter getting to be part of this wealthy family by possibly marrying Rahul. Or maybe because Indrani knew Rahul was technically Sheena's stepbrother. although I don't know how it would matter. They're not related by blood. Indrani only viewed her 2 children as burdens and reminders of a past that she wanted to erase. Sheena and Indrani fought often as Indrani devised conniving schemes to get Sheena fired from jobs and get isolated from friends. Indrani even tried to get her son Mikhail committed to rehab by arranging him to be drugged. He woke up in a mental health facility and barely escaped a few weeks of being forcibly held there.
It sounds like maybe she was just too young when she had the first 2 kids, and yeah, she probably resented them for that, and when she got her second chance at a life, she was really possessive of that second chance. So the fact that they came back into her life posed some kind of threat to her.
True. To add another level of complication, Indrani and Peter allegedly embezzled more than $100 million out of a TV network that they started and closed up within a few years. They parked this embezzled money in an overseas account in the name of her daughter, Sheena Bora.
Sketchy.
Sheena had threatened to freeze the money if Indrani didn't treat her well. I mean, Indrani only knew how to respect money, so maybe that's what Sheena thought will get her attention.
Mm-hmm.
But Sheena was now a pawn in a very dangerous game with an unforgiving villainess. In 2011, Indrani used her personal doctor to prescribe various antipsychotic drugs to Sheena. She fell sick and almost died, but for Rahul, who rescued her and took her to another city to get better away from Indrani. A year later, Indrani secretly got Sheena a job back in Mumbai, which she could not refuse. And so she and Rahul moved back to Mumbai within Indrani's clutches. The happy couple got engaged and planned to get married soon. It was end game for Indrani now. In April 2012, Indrani started to send Sheena brief messages as if she wanted to patch up their tumultuous mother-daughter relationship. Indrani dangled the prospect of paying for Sheena's MBA in London to get her to meet her. Poor Sheena believed her mother had finally come around and agreed to meet her for shopping, dinner, and apartment hunting. Indrani took Sheena sari shopping and then allegedly gave her a bottle of water laced with a powerful sedative. Once Sheena was fully unconscious, Indrani allegedly strangled her with the help of her driver and ex-husband Sanjay Khanna. The trio parked the car in the garage overnight with Sheena's body in the trunk. Indrani had invited her son Mikhail over to her home the same night and tried to get him blackout drunk. Mikhail was cautious and locked himself in a room pretending to be sick. This saved his life. And so leaving Mikhail at home, the 3 got back on the road the next day to dispose of Sheena's body. Indrani put makeup on her deceased daughter's face and leaned her on the seat next to her as if she were sleeping. They then allegedly dumped Sheena's body in the forest and burnt her remains. Rahul, Sheena's fiancé, was beside himself with worry as Sheena had been missing for months. Indrani told him that Sheena had left him and moved to the US. Rahul loved her, and so he persevered, and finally the cops arrested the driver on weapons charges, which led to this confession of the entire murder plot. Both Indrani and Peter were eventually arrested, and their trial is slated to start in the coming year. No matter what the outcome of the trial is, we can be sure of one thing. Indrani was a horrible mother who used her kids like disposable assets.
I wonder what her 3rd child thinks of the whole situation. I'm hoping that she's not sending any Mother's Day flowers to Indrani in jail.
Yeah, I mean, she really tried to eliminate both her kids from her life as if they meant nothing. And on that note, happy Mother's Day, y'all.
Happy Mother's Day.
Our journey takes us through a moonlit forest, where gnarled trees twist and reach for the sky, like the grasping hands of vengeful spirits. In the darkness, a mother's love can turn into something much more sinister. In a moonlit clearing, we meet Whitney and Melissa, who share a story from their podcast, Cults, Crimes, and Cabernet.
This day is extra special to Whitney and I. For those that don't know, we are both boy moms. But let's just jump right in. May 14th, 1995 was Mother's Day in Universal City, California. And it was exactly as you could imagine. Beautiful weather, a perfect day with a high of 65 degrees. What mother wouldn't want to take this opportunity to have a late dinner with her son to celebrate? That is exactly what 61-year-old Doris Carassi did. Her son, Paul Carassi, invited her and the mother of his 2-year-old son, Sonia Salinas, out to dinner. They settled on the Country Star restaurant in Universal Studios City Walk. For those that don't know, the City Walk is a strip of restaurants and retail stores that is just adjacent to Universal Studios amusement park.
After what appeared to be a lovely dinner, the 4 family members headed towards their car at the top level of the parking garage shortly after 11 p.m. Now, this was not the only available parking at the time, so keep that in mind. What happened on the 5th floor is not entirely clear either. What we do know is that Paul stumbled down to the 4th floor of the garage where he encountered a security guard. He had cuts on his hands and then collapsed near the stairwell. He told the guard that 2 women had been attacked and that his kid was in the car. The guards radioed into the police department, and there were several units within 5 miles for another call. When the security team followed Paul up to his blue Chevy Caprice, they noted that there was quite a scene. 2 women laying on the ground where it seemed as though a struggle had occurred. The doors were wide open.
The guards noted that the victims had been brutally stabbed in their face, chest, and had their throats deeply slashed. Paul and Sonia's son remained strapped into his car seat in the back seat of the car, yelling for his mother. Paul was covered in blood and originally told officers that he did not touch the bodies and he did not know why he was covered in blood. He claimed that he unlocked the car, and he realized he didn't have all of his keys and that someone shoved him in the back demanding money. He claimed to say he didn't have any and that the attacker took his fanny pack and pushed him to the ground. Then he stood up and Sonia and Doris had already been murdered. He then said he made his way downstairs looking for help. During his interrogation, he couldn't remember what his attacker looked like or which way they had fled the scene. He did say they had male voices, but that was all he could share.
Paramedics arrived on scene and assessed Paul. They found a small cut on his thumb that was not bleeding, but could not determine where the copious amounts of blood on his clothing could have come from. The paramedic did mention that Paul's responses to his questions seemed a bit strange. Sometimes he would calmly and concisely answer the question, and other times he would get emotional with his answers and almost seem confused. In the paramedic's experience, most people he encounters after a trauma act withdrawn or upset, but not both. The officers that were a few miles away had received a 911 call for a woman that claimed she had pulled over on the side of the road and someone had attempted to rob her. The 44-year-old Donna Lee had been stabbed in the back and abdomen. She was taken to a nearby hospital and treated for her injuries, but they were extensive enough for her to need to be sedated. One officer stayed with her red Chevrolet Beretta, which was strangely locked. The officer noted that there were 2 fanny packs, one that the investigators would later learn belonged to Paul, and the other Doris. A blue sweater, a latex glove, a washcloth, a pair of wool gloves, and a large butcher knife with a blunted tip inside one of the fanny packs that had been tossed aside, as well as Sonia's purse.
One of these fanny packs had belonged to Doris, and Paul had told the guard back at the parking garage that they had been robbed. As investigations continue, law enforcement learned that Donna and Paul are not only connected, They are co-workers and were in a relationship together. Doris, Paul, and Sonia all worked at the downtown branch of the Bank of America. A neighbor had told police that when Paul, Donna, and Sonia left for dinner around 9 p.m., they were happy and chatty, but that wasn't the case a few weeks prior. Doris had gotten into a fight with Donna, saying she shouldn't be living there, and hit Donna in the head with her keys. Paul must have put this aside to be able to celebrate Mother's Day with his mom and the mother of his child.
A little further digging into Paul and Sonia's past seemed to draw out some skeletons. In mid-1993, Sonia had some health complications, and she was in and out of the hospital a bit. Doris helped with the then baby, but when she finally recovered, Sonia decided to move to West Hollywood to stay in her family's home to ease the burden on her health for a little while. Sonia brought the baby back and forth to see his father and grandmother, but this just wasn't enough for Paul. He made several statements to his coworkers and friends that he was concerned Sonia's family wouldn't allow him to see his son. He even made a comment to a fellow coworker that he hoped that B-word had died in the hospital.
Others came forward with character testimonies, talking about how Paul was very controlling, especially towards women, and that he had an arrogant, wannabe attitude and carried a police scanner. Heck, even his Chevy Caprice seemed to lend to him wanting to be a member of law enforcement. One even stated he would drive to Hollywood and scare sex workers into thinking he was watching them for solicitation. In fall of 1994, Sonia took Paul to court for child support, and the judge agreed to garnish the $375 a month out of his paychecks. This put a huge strain on their relationship. He made many veiled threats about how the money she was taking put him in dire financial strain. He had over $50,000 in consumer debt and was closing in on the need to file bankruptcy.
Investigations also yielded that whoever committed these murders seemed to have done their homework. The location was one of the few blind spots in the cameras of the garage. And remember how I said that it was not the only parking available between the restaurant and the parking garage? Interesting that he would choose that area.
Mm-hmm.
May 18th, Paul was arrested, but later released when prosecution was not ready to press charges due to not quite having enough evidence yet.
A forensic expert recreated the crime scene and evidence for the court, and the report showed that one of the victims fought back on her attacker, and the clothing that Paul was wearing that night had a bloody handprint and blood splatter that could have only been present had he been close to her during the attack. Other evidence supported that there was more than one assailant, and Donna's blood was found at the scene as well as the victim's blood on Donna's jeans.
Both Paul and Donna were arrested on first-degree murder charges. Prosecutors sought the death penalty for both, but ultimately Paul received the death penalty and is currently on death row, while Donna was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Happy Mother's Day.
As we press on, we arrive at a crumbling cafe, where mothers once gathered to share stories and support one another. The dilapidated building stands as a testament to the shadowy secrets that can lie beneath even the most wholesome facades. Within the crumbling cafe, two ghostly figures materialize before us, Amanda and Courtney. They share a bone-chilling tale from their podcast, A Nefarious Nightmare.
As mothers, we always love our children unconditionally and often give them the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes our job in motherhood is a thankless one. What with endless dirty diapers, kissed boo-boos, bath time, what to make for dinner, navigating growing pains, and finding the nicest way to tell your kid no when they want something they can't have, like candy or the latest video game.
And then when you think that things are looking up, you're hit with the inevitable pain that comes with puberty. Emotions real high, rebellion sets in, social and peer pressure increases, and let's be honest, kids of all ages can be so mean. Depression is at its all-time high in that age, when teenagers are finding out a lot more about themselves and becoming a version of who they will be for the rest of their lives, while keeping somewhat of a naive and innocence with them as they learn a lot more about right and wrong. With that, I'm Amanda Cronin.
And I'm Courtney Fenner, and we are a Nefarious Nightmare. Today we will be discussing the case of Rachel Hudson, who very tragically murdered her mother. As a teenager, can you remember a time where, despite loving your mom and dad, you also just couldn't stand them? Some of you are listening to this and cringing. Some of you are pretending you have no idea what we're talking about. And let's be real here. You've had that moment. Don't be shy. Just admit it. But unfortunately, some of you may not have had a decent mother or even a mother figure at all. To which we say, I am so sorry that you've had that pain to endure. Believe us, we empathize. But many of you are rolling your eyes and chuckling, remembering the time your mom showed up unexpected at your school dance and did the Roger Rabbit or something in front of everyone. Yeah, moms. Am I right?
This particular case is heartbreaking. It's about a girl named Rachel who felt she needed to, essentially, save her mom or herself. But unfortunately, that's not at all what happened. This case is very hairy for everyone because as mothers, we have this longing to understand and forgive and even empathize with the perpetrator in this case, but also feel extreme terror for ourselves and empathize with the family because this could very well happen to any mother at any time by anyone.
The Thanksgiving celebration of the Hudson family took a tragic turn when Rachel, who was 19 years old at the time, fatally shot her mother inside their Virginia residence in the early hours of the Friday following Thanksgiving in 2013. Subsequently, Rachel sent a photograph of her deceased mother to her father, who was out shopping for Black Friday sales. In an interview exclusively conducted by Dr. Phil from the Hampton Roads Regional Jail in Portsmouth, Virginia, Rachel discloses the events that lead up to the murder and expresses her regret for her actions.
Rachel has stated that she had intended to end her mother's life and subsequently her own. She expressed a desire for her father to be informed of the situation before she took her own life. It was at this point that she decided to send him a photograph of her deceased mother to prove her actions. Rachel explains that her father repeatedly requested to speak with her mother, despite her informing him of her passing. She wished for her father to believe her, as every moment of reality was unbearable, and she longed to depart. Rachel has shared that her family was under significant strain while caring for her ailing mother, who was slowly passing away, after enduring multiple heart attacks over the years and was also dealing with kidney and heart failure. Quote, "We had been fussing and fighting a lot, and we had promised we were going to get along better," she said in an interview.
Rachel said that at approximately 1 a.m., she had been engaging in a disagreement with her father, Donald. According to her account, Donald called her into his room and asked why she was still awake. Rachel responded by saying that she had been using the computer, which then led to a heated exchange. She recounted feeling as though the situation was hopeless, with no hope for improvement or change, and that stress would be a constant presence in her life. Rachel was aware that her future held difficult times following her mother's passing, and Donald eventually left, leaving Rachel and her mother alone in the residence. It was at this point that Rachel made a decision that would have a lasting impact on the family.
Rachel said, quote, "I wanted to kill myself. I had an overwhelming sense of not wanting to be there anymore," end quote. She said, explaining that she felt that her family would be better off without her. Rachel then composed a suicide note, and proceeded to retrieve a shotgun from a secure gun safe located in her closet. She expressed concern regarding the individual who would discover her lifeless body, acknowledging that it would likely be her mother who would hear the sound of the gunshot and find her. Rachel further explained that she began to contemplate the impact her actions would have on her family, believing that they would be better off without her. In an effort to spare her mother the anguish of discovering her body, Rachel made the decision to take her own mother's life with a single shot from the shotgun.
Afterward, Rachel made the decision not to take her own life without first speaking with her father. After that incident, according to Rachel, she skimmed the suicide note, felt it didn't seem adequate, and then claimed that she was apprehensive that her father would arrive home to find both her and her mother deceased, and there would still be a firearm in the house. She also expressed concern that he might harm himself. Quote, "I just wanted him to understand. I didn't want him to think it was his fault. He was asking me, how could I do this? And I told him that I was sorry. I just kept saying I was sorry and that I was going to kill myself," Rachel had said.
Donald was able to persuade his daughter not to take her own life. Rachel shared with Dr. Phil that her father advised her against it as he could not bear to lose both of them. She realized that her family was already in a lot of pain because of her actions, and taking her own life would only make things worse. Dr. Phil asked her if she had the opportunity to relive that night, would she still shoot her mom? Rachel had answered no, and claiming that she would contact the authorities and inform them of her suicidal ideation with a request for them to assist her with aid.
Rachel has shown remorse for her actions, claiming that if her mother were able to contact her, that she would say, quote, I'm sorry, and that I love her. I wish I could take it back, and I wish it would have been different. I didn't want it to be like this at all, and I miss her a lot. I miss her every day. I think about her. I'm going to do better. I'm going to do something with my life to fix what I've done. I don't want to be known for this. I want to be known for something better. One day, I want my parents to be proud of me.
Rachel was sentenced to 50 years in prison with 35 years suspended and will serve a total of 18 years behind bars. After her attorney argued she suffered from mental illness that was undiagnosed for years. This case was very heartbreaking, and Courtney and I both hope you gained and learned something from it. With all of this said, happy Mother's Day. Be safe and be vigilant, for when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
We leave the eerie cafe and find ourselves in a desolate playground, where rusted swings creak in the wind and abandoned toys are strewn across the grounds. It's here that we meet Charlie, who recounts a gripping story from her podcast, Crime Lines.
Today, we're going to talk about how far a mother's love and rage can push her. This case starts in 1980 with Mary Ann Bachmeyer and her 7-year-old daughter, Anna, who lived in the city of Lübeck, which was then a part of West Germany. Mary Ann had suffered a lot in her life, including first abuse at the hands of her former Nazi soldier father, and then at the hands of her ultra-religious stepfather. At 16, she was kicked out of her home because she became pregnant. She placed that child for adoption. At 18, she had her second baby, and barely able to support herself, Mary Ann also placed that child for adoption. Then in 1973, Mary Ann gave birth to Anna at the age of 23. Finally, with a stable home and a job, she felt she was in a place to raise her child. But only the one. After Anna's birth, Mary Ann had her tubes tied. Mary Ann largely raised Anna alone and had to take the little girl to work with her at a local bar. And when her shift was over and Anna was asleep on a bench somewhere, Marianne would stay late partying with her friends. During the day when Marianne would sleep, Anna would largely be left to her own devices. At one point, Marianne spoke with another family about fostering Anna for a while she tried to get her life back on track, but she never went through with it. It seems living without her child, even temporarily, was not something Marianne wanted to do. In 1980, Anna was 7 years old and was described as an energetic and happy child who was a lot more independent than most children her age. On the morning of Monday, May 5th, 1980, Anna and Marianne got into an argument before Anna left for school. Angry, Anna stormed out, headed not in the direction of her school, but instead towards a friend's house. Of course, the friend was at school, so Anna just played outside. One of her neighbors, 35-year-old Klaus Grabowski, invited Anna in to play with his cats. This was something she had done before, but this time, Anna never left the house alive. When Anna didn't make it home from school that day and Marianne couldn't find her, she called the police. Within about 24 hours, Klaus's fiancé showed up at the police station to report that Klaus had confessed to her that he had killed Anna. Klaus then confessed to the police. He claimed that after he hugged Anna, oh so innocently, she demanded he pay her 5 marks or she would tell her mother that Klaus had molested her. Klaus said he was afraid to go to jail, so he held Anna in his apartment until he figured out what to do. He decided he had no other choice but to kill her. He grabbed a pair of his fiancé's pantyhose and strangled the little girl to death. He then put her body into a box and buried her in a shallow grave by the canal. Little Anna's body was then recovered. The investigators did not believe that this little 7-year-old girl tried to extort Klaus for no reason. They fully believed that he had either molested her or tried to when she fought back or threatened to tell her mother what happened. And that's when Klaus decided he had to kill her. And they believed this because Klaus had a history. In the early 1970s, Klaus was convicted of molesting a 6-year-old girl and attempting to strangle her. For this, he was given 1 year of probation. Less than 2 years after that, Klaus was arrested for molesting 2 children, a boy and a girl, both 9 years old. He was found guilty and sentenced to a year in a psychiatric hospital for treatment. In 1976, Klaus underwent a voluntary castration in an attempt to curb his sex drive. Not a chemical castration, but a physical one, and supposedly irreversible. However, by 1978, Klaus had gone to a urologist and asked for hormone replacement therapy so that he could have a normal sex life with his partner. He had to obtain court approval for this, which he got. So Klaus was a convicted pedophile who was getting hormone therapy to restore his sex drive. He said he knew no one would believe him that he didn't molest Anna if she accused him due to his past. And Klaus was right. 40 years later, and I still don't believe him. Klaus's trial began in March 1981, 10 months after Anna's murder. The prosecutors couldn't prove that Anna had been molested, so they focused their case on the murder. The third day of trial occurred on March 6, 1981. 31-year-old Marianne Bachmeier showed up and took her seat. At 10 a.m., Klaus and his attorney came in as the judge was about to start the testimony. As soon as Klaus sat down, Marianne stood up, pulled out a Beretta 70 from her purse, and opened fire, hitting Klaus 6 times. When the gun was empty, Marianne threw it on the ground and waited for the courtroom guards to take her into custody. Klaus died within minutes of hitting the courtroom floor. Marianne was charged with murder, but her defense claimed this was, at most, manslaughter as she hadn't planned to kill Klaus. It was a heat-of-the-moment decision, and the reason she had a gun was because the life she was going to take was her own. On the morning of the shooting, Marianne visited Anna's grave before court and was overcome with grief. When she arrived at the courthouse, she overheard Klaus and his attorney talking about him making a statement in court that day. She took her seat, thinking about how Klaus had accused her sweet daughter of trying to blackmail him, as though her death was because of her actions and not his. So when Marianne saw the back of Klaus in court and thought about what he was about to say on the record, she couldn't think rationally. She said she had a vision of Anna and heard her scream before Marianne pulled the trigger. Marianne was convicted of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. She was sentenced to 6 years but was released early in June 1985. Marianne moved out of the country first with her new husband, who taught at a German school, and then in 1990, after they divorced, Marianne moved to Palermo, Sicily, where she became a hospice worker. In 1996, Marianne was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She returned to Germany and died on September 17, 1996, at only 46 years old. She was then buried next to Anna. Before her death, Marianne admitted that she thought about killing Klaus before she did it, undermining her own defense that it was a heat-of-the-moment decision. And later, to erase all doubt, a friend came forward and said that Marianne had spent days shooting the gun in the basement of the bar where she worked, perfecting her aim so she could exact her revenge on the man who took her child away from her. In response to this revelation, most people thought, who could blame her?
As we step away from the ghostly playground, we enter a dimly lit alley, where secrets lurk in the shadows. In the gloom, we encounter Jessica, who shares a spine-tingling true crime tale from her show, the Asian Madness Podcast.
I've decided to bring you a case that took place in Taiwan, because that's where I'm from. Quick warning, this case is pretty depressing, not at all happy. Her name is Wu Ruoshu, and she was a young mother who did everything she could, but sometimes giving it your all just isn't enough. Let's begin. Who was Wu Ruoshu? I will refer to her as Wu for this segment. She was born in late March 1990, and if you do the math, she is very young. Unfortunately, like many others out there, she came from a broken home, where her father physically abused her mother, and the two eventually divorced before she started elementary school. Her mother tried her best, even at one point remarrying, hoping to give her 4 children a father figure and a stable family dynamic. Despite her efforts, the things Wu experienced as a child really ended up impacting her. Growing up, her biggest dream was to have a family of her own, have a present and loving husband/father. That's very normal. Many of us look forward to having our own families, but sometimes that want and need can cloud our judgments. When Wu was 19, she met and fell in love with a man who would eventually become her husband. It was not a fairy tale romance. He would not turn out to be the Prince Charming she was hoping for. He was abusive, she worked her ass off, and after falling pregnant the first time, he managed to convince her to abort the baby because it was not a good time. In a sense, I get it. If you're both struggling, it's very difficult to add another member to your family. She did as he demanded, but soon after, she fell pregnant again. Both her husband and her mother again tried to tell her not to have this baby, that it will only add stress and financial issues to her already problematic situation. This time, though, she was determined to keep her baby. As a quick side note, abortion is very much legal in Taiwan, depending on how far along you are, of course. Wu's husband did not like that she had a baby, but what could he do? The two decided to get married anyway, in the year 2013, when Wu was 23. Taiwan is not super conservative, but it's quite uncommon to see unmarried couples with kids. So now that they got married, you'd think they'd at least play the part of a happy family, right? Well, no. It was said that during their entire marriage, the couple lived separately. According to sources, the only time the husband would show up to see his wife was when he wanted sex. He did nothing for the baby. It was all on her, with her family members occasionally pitching in. This unhealthy dynamic continued on for a bit, and by the year 2015, Wu had her second baby, and the couple decided to divorce. At this point, staying married was completely pointless. She was the only parent giving 2 shits about their kids anyway. Not saying her ex-husband did not have a say in whether she had a baby or not, but it did not seem like they practiced safe sex. And if they didn't, well, there are usually consequences, like, say, getting pregnant. So beginning in the year 2015, Wu became a single mother. Her educational background was very limited, as in she was only a high school graduate and did not earn another degree. Obviously, there are various jobs that do not require college degrees, but it was difficult. Most jobs she came across were either low-paying or the hours required were over the top. Working regular jobs in Taiwan can be very excruciating. Not as bad as it is in Japan or Korea, but there's usually mandatory overtime with no pay, very traditional work styles, and of course, low pay, despite living costs not being that high compared to, say, the US. Honestly, all the jobs she looked into were doable. Definitely could have been enough for her, but 100% not enough with 2 kids. She did find a decent paying job at one point, but because they required her to come in every other Saturday, it meant that she would have to find childcare for her kids, and that extra expense alone just did not make any sense to her, so she had to give that up. She would sometimes work several part-time jobs just to have enough for her and her 2 kids. You might be thinking, she has family though, right? Her mom, her siblings, even her sister-in-law. But we were not there. We're not part of that family. It's very difficult to say how involved they were, if they even wanted to be involved, or if Wu even wanted to ask her family members for help. She might have wanted to prove to others that she could do it, that she was not a failure, and as they were her children, maybe she felt it was her sole duty to provide. By the year 2019, 29-year-old Wu was on the brink of a breakdown. She had no choice but to move in with her brother and her sister-in-law. She was heavily depressed, in financial ruin, had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and also took a lot of sleeping pills. Her health was worsening day by day, and people around her began to notice a drastic change. She had mentioned suicide multiple times, and her first recorded attempt was in November of 2019, where she tried to duct tape her mouth and nose shut in order to asphyxiate. She was found in time, but instead of helping her, her brother found her to be annoying. He allegedly texted her after her attempt, saying something along the lines of, "What is your issue? What are you doing? Trying to die? Do I look like Charity? You better explain what the duct tape thing was about. If you want to die, take your kids to their father and die together. Better yet, wear a red dress." FYI, it's pretty typical for some female ghosts in Taiwan lore to wear red dresses or clothing, because supposedly if you kill yourself wearing red, you come back as a vengeful spirit. But anyway, the text was very harsh. I understand he felt a lot of pressure, and if she were to die, would he have to take over for the 2 children? As someone who was already depressed and ready to die, these words only made it worse for her. She felt guiltier, and like she was a terrible mother. Around January of 2020, she had lost so much weight she weighed a whopping 32 kilograms, approximately 70 pounds. Her 2 kids also required expensive medical care. How was she going to make this work? In February of 2020, Wu decided to take her 2 kids and leave her brother's home. Where was she planning on going is unknown. Her daughter's teacher found out and informed social services, stating that Wu was a single mother with financial stress, and that she needed help. Wu's brother got involved, and despite his previous complaints, he managed to get her to come back to his place, but set some ground rules. She had to stop sleeping all day, and she had to get a job before the end of March. The 2 argued over this, and once again, Wu grabbed her 2 kids and left. If you haven't noticed, mental health issues is not widely understood or even accepted in Taiwan yet. The new generation, of course, is a lot more open-minded, but overall, it's still considered kind of like a myth, like a get-over-it kind of situation. It's very frustrating. She took them to a motel, and that's when she decided she had to end it for everyone. She tried to suffocate her kids to death with a pillow, but that failed miserably. A couple days after her first attempt to kill them, she tried her hand at it again, this time putting her crushed-up sleeping pills in their Jell-O cups. Once the 2 kids fell into a deep sleep, she proceeded to strangle them with a rope. This time, she succeeded. Of course, she didn't want to live either. She grabbed a handful of her depression and sleeping pills swallowed them, drank alcohol, and fell asleep. She believed that this would have been enough to kill her, but turns out that was not the case. She was saved again just in time. This was a very upsetting case overall. A young woman who became a mother to 2 kids struggled her entire life to find the kind of warmth she lacked as a child, but only to end up realizing how cold and lonely the world really was for her. Long story short, the judge on her trial was not at all sympathetic to her situation. I know, she killed her 2 young children. That is horrible. But things are rarely ever black and white. She did not kill out of malice, and she had intentions of ending her life as well. Not that it makes it any better. The judge refused to look at her overall situation. He called her a bad mother, told her to get it together, that tons of people are in her situation. If they can make it work, why can't she? If she loved her kids, she would never have killed them. Therefore, she never loved them. He completely overlooked the court issues, basically rejecting anything that could have led up to such tragedy. I hate it when people refuse to let others have a difficult time. Like you're struggling? So-and-so have it worse. It's not a suffering contest. No one wants to win the trophy for worst life ever. Boo was initially sentenced to death, but her sentence was later reduced to life in prison. So there you have it. A very tragic story of a young mother who wanted to be the best for her children, who wanted a complete family, but in the end had to resort to some extreme ways. I know for sure she's not the only struggling parent out there. Yes, it could have been worse, but does it mean her situation wasn't terrible? Everyone reacts differently under harsh conditions. Couple that with her crippling depression. It just was a disaster waiting to happen. I want to give a shout out to all the mothers out there, except a select few like Casey Anthony and Susan Smith, because you guys keep the family going, keep the kids alive, and I know there are sacrifices along the way. Thank you so much, and happy Mother's Day to you lovely people. Stay safe. Till next time.
We leave the shadows of the alley and find ourselves in a once grand mansion, now overgrown with ivy and shrouded in darkness. It's here we make camp for the night and end the first night of our Mother's Day collaboration. Remember, friend, all the shows you heard from tonight are listed in the show notes in order of appearance, along with a link to find them. I'm Shane Waters from Foul Play Crime Series. It's been a pleasure to be your guide tonight. I'll see you tomorrow for part 2. Good night. Hello again, friend. Welcome back to part 2 of my chilling Mother's Day collaboration special. Before we embark on our journey again, I want to take a moment to reflect on the origins of this holiday. To truly understand the history of Mother's Day, we must go back thousands of years to the ancient world. The earliest known celebrations of mothers and motherhood can be traced back to the annual spring festival in ancient Greece, honoring Rhea, the mother of gods. But it wasn't just the Greeks. The Romans also had a festival called Matronalia, where husbands and children would shower their wives and mothers with gifts and flowers. This tradition carried on for centuries, in various forms, eventually influencing a Christian holiday known as Mothering Sunday. Mothering Sunday was celebrated in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom, on the 4th Sunday of Lent. This was a time when people would return to their mother church, the church where they were baptized and grew up attending. Families would reunite, and children would often bring gifts, such as flowers or small tokens, for their mothers. But what about modern Mother's Day? For that, we must turn to the early 20th century and the efforts of a woman named Anna Jarvis. Anna Jarvis was the daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis, a social activist and community organizer who worked hard to improve the lives of women and families. After her mother's death in 1905, Anna sought to create a day that would honor the sacrifices mothers made for their children. In 1908, Anna held the first Mother's Day celebration at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia. By 1912, she had successfully established the Mother's Day International Association and began campaigning to have Mother's Day recognized as an official holiday. Her hard work paid off, and on May 9, 1914, President Woodrow Wilson signed a proclamation designating the second Sunday in May as a national holiday to honor mothers. Mother's Day had officially become a part of American culture. Anna Jarvis envisioned Mother's Day as a time for families to come together and spend quality time with their mothers, writing heartfelt letters and expressing their love and gratitude. However, she became disillusioned with the commercialization of the holiday as it grew in popularity. Despite her disappointment, Mother's Day continued to spread across the globe, with countries adopting their own unique traditions and customs. So as we celebrate Mother's Day this year, let's remember its roots and honor the sacrifices of mothers everywhere, and take the time to truly appreciate the love and dedication they show us every day. Now, let's get into the adventure. We wake up the next morning in the once grand mansion, now overgrown with ivy and shrouded in darkness. The broken windows and cracked walls whisper tales of long-forgotten family secrets. It's here that we meet Esther, who tells a shocking story from her podcast, Once Upon a Crime.
Diane Downs was a 27-year-old mother of 3 in the spring of 1983 when she arrived at a Springfield, Oregon hospital emergency room. She screamed for help, saying a man had attempted to carjack her on a rural country road, and when she refused to give him her car, he shot her 3 children sleeping in the back seat. The horror of such a random act of violence against innocent children shocked the community and the police. But once suspicions were raised that their mother was the shooter, the question became why? What would cause a mother to murder her children? The answer was as cold-blooded as it was shocking. Diane Downs was in love with love. Perhaps this was because, as she claimed, she was raised with a strict and controlling father who showed her little affection, and a passive mother who put her husband's needs before her children's. Diane, born in 1955, was the first of 5 children born to Wesley and Willadine Fredrickson. Diane and her siblings were raised in a conservative Baptist home. Her father worked for the U.S. Postal Service, and the family moved often as he was transferred to other positions. By the time she was in high school, they were living in Phoenix, Arizona. Diane said she felt ignored by her mother and criticized by her father. As a result, she grew up with a desperate need for love and affection. Diane didn't make friends easily and described herself as an ugly duckling as a child. She recalled being teased or ignored by her classmates. Even worse was the ridicule and bullying she experienced in grade school. Diane blossomed into a pretty teen with a cute figure that she soon realized made her popular with the boys. For the first time, Diane felt seen. Even better, she felt a sense of power over the teenage boys who sought her attention. She gained a reputation at Moon Valley High as a flirt, but it was Steve Downs who won her heart. He was wild and rebellious, and Diane was instantly attracted to him. By 16, they were an item and began a sexual relationship. When her parents found out, they forbade their daughter to see Steve Downs, but it was only after graduation that the couple parted. Steve joined the Navy, and Diane was accepted at a Bible college in California, so they went their separate ways. Diane began relationships with several boys she met in college, trying to fill the void left by Steve's departure. After 2 semesters, she was kicked out of school for promiscuity and returned to Phoenix. Steve returned to town, and in 1973, when they were both 18, they married against their parents' wishes. Diane wanted to start a family right away. She romanticized what it would be like to have children. She often expressed a desire to have babies because she'd finally have someone who would love her unconditionally. Diane didn't say she wanted someone to love unconditionally. Instead, she believed a child would fulfill all her emotional needs. Soon after their wedding, however, Steve Downs told Diane that he had changed his mind. He didn't want kids right away. Maybe in a few years, he offered. She was furious. She accused him of never loving her. Her feelings of rejection grew when she discovered Steve was cheating on her. Diane became obsessed with the idea of having a baby to fulfill her need for love and affection. She stopped using birth control and soon found herself pregnant. She was thrilled. Her daughter Christy was born on October 7, 1974. Diane said she experienced real love for the first time in her life when her daughter was born. But the reality of having a baby soon set in, and Diane became exhausted and disillusioned about being a mother. She and Stephen frequently argued about the stress of raising a child with limited resources. Still, Diane continued to chase the high she got from being pregnant and giving birth. While pregnant, the pretty blonde, who still looked like a teenager, received a lot of attention. Strangers congratulated her. Her family asked about her health and gave advice. She lapped it all up and craved more. Diane became pregnant again, and her daughter Cheryl Lynn was born in 1976. Cheryl was colicky and cried constantly. Diane grew impatient and frustrated that she wasn't feeling the unconditional love she so desperately craved. Her relationship with her husband became strained to the breaking point, and she decided to leave him. So the timing was terrible when she discovered she was pregnant for the 3rd time. Unwilling to stay in the relationship, Diane felt her only option was to terminate the pregnancy. Afterwards, she left her marriage, taking 2-year-old Christy and 9-month-old Cheryl with her. Finding it hard to parent and provide for her children alone, she and Steve would reconcile and break up several times over the next 2 years. Inexplicably, Diane decided she wanted another child. Steve had since had a vasectomy, and she asked him to have it reversed, but he refused. Now working outside of the home, Diane began sleeping with several of her coworkers. She purposely set out to get pregnant by one of her lovers. Steve found out and got into a physical altercation with the man, but it was too late. Diane was pregnant. Stephen Daniel Downs was born on December 29, 1979. Although he wasn't his biological father, Steve raised the boy they called Danny as his own. Diane was an inconsistent mother to her children. While stressed and unhappy, she was impatient, angry, and sometimes neglectful. When happy, she doted on her children and took them on special outings. She played with them as if she were a child herself and called them her best friends. The kids became confused and sometimes fearful of Diane. Which mother would they experience today? The nice one who loved them or the angry one who yelled and punished them? Diane began working as a mail carrier at the Chandler post office and started sleeping with a series of her coworkers. Witnesses say that with Steve often gone or while he and Diane were on the outs, Diane would be out with one boyfriend or another and put her social life in front of her children. She kicked her husband out again and moved her current boyfriend in with her. He was also a single parent, and he brought his 2 daughters, a few years older than Diane's children, with him. This arrangement didn't last long. Steve was constantly dropping by, which was awkward for everyone. And Diane's boyfriend didn't like how she treated her children. Her kids seemed like a pain in the ass to her, he said. She felt that kids were inferior. They weren't even allowed in the living room. She called her kids vulgar and demeaning names, he added. When Diane began lashing out at his daughters as well, he left. Diane sometimes left the children alone altogether. During these times, Steve would step in and care for the children until Diane returned. She was always a person who needed an enormous amount of attention, a bottomless pit of need. This need resulted in her applying to become a surrogate mother. She was paid to conceive and carry a child for a couple who was experiencing fertility issues. She gave birth to a baby girl in 1982. Diane received $10,000 and was even interviewed for a Washington Post story about surrogate parenting. The attention and accolades she received meant more to Diane than the money, but she put it to good use, purchasing a mobile home in Chandler and new furniture. She talked incessantly to her coworkers about her experience as a surrogate mother. "These people needed me. It made me somebody," Diane said. When she returned to work at the post office after the baby's birth, she set her sights on one man in particular. Robert Knickerbocker, or Nick, as Diane called him, was a married man with whom she began an affair in the summer of 1982. He tried to keep things discreet, but Diane immediately fell for him, and everyone knew she was not only sleeping with Nick, but obsessed with him. He told her he didn't want kids around while they were together, saying it was wrong. She accommodated this request, pawning the children off to their father, neighbors, or other relatives while she was engaged in her secret rendezvous with Nick. She began urging Nick to leave his wife and marry her, but he made it clear he had no intention of doing so. She ignored this, believing he'd come around when he realized that it was her he loved. She used sex to keep him coming back, and even while he protested that he would never commit to her, he continued the affair. Diane's mobile home burned down just 6 months after she purchased it, and arson was suspected. However, she received an insurance settlement for a few $1,000s and used a portion of it to lease an apartment. She listed both herself and Nick on the lease. Nick had finally had enough. His wife had caught wind of the affair and gave him an ultimatum. It was either her or Diane. Nick told Diane he couldn't see her anymore and broke things off. He said he still loved his wife and was working to repair his marriage. He also reminded her that he'd made it clear he didn't want children. He'd had a vasectomy early in his marriage to prevent this from happening. That's how sure he was about this decision. Diane was the mother of 3, and Nick said this alone put him off ever marrying her or offering her a commitment. Diane went ballistic, calling and harassing Nick and his wife nonstop after he stopped seeing her. She even pounded on Nick's door, insisting he talk to her. The couple finally left the state for a long vacation to escape her. Still thinking she could win him back, Diane packed up her kids and moved to be near her parents, who were now living in Oregon. It was Diane's plan that once she was settled, she'd contact Nick, whom she was sure would come to his senses once her threat to leave became real. He could then join her in Oregon to escape his wife. Diane believed if she could get him alone, he could be talked into marrying her. In April of 1983, she arrived in Springfield, Oregon with her 3 children. Just a few weeks later, Diane Downs would arrive at the emergency department of a Springfield hospital and announce that her children had been shot and were dying in the back seat of her car. Diane Downs called Robert Knickerbocker, the man she was obsessed with, once she arrived in Springfield, Oregon. She thought he'd miss her and want her back, but Nick told Diane it was over. He wasn't ever moving to Oregon to be with her, period. Not one to give up easily, Diane made one last effort to convince him. A week later, she returned to Arizona and surprised him at work. She made an excuse about needing to return a gold chain he'd given her. She launched into a speech about her love for him and all the plans she'd made for them to be together. "I told her I wasn't going to Oregon," Nick told investigators later. "I told her I just didn't want to be a daddy." Then he drove off in his mail truck. That was the last time he saw her. A few days later, on the evening of May 19, 1983, a small red sports car screeched to a halt at an emergency room entrance of the Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield. Nurses came running and saw a young blonde woman standing outside of her car. "Someone just shot my kids," she told them. When they peered into the car, they saw 2 small bodies slumped in the back seat. As they rushed them to the trauma center, the woman called out, "Get Cheryl, she's on the floor, she hasn't moved at all." A nurse peered in and saw another small body, but this one was on the floor in the front seat, on the passenger side. The last child found was the most critically wounded. 2 bullet holes were found in 7-year-old Christy's back. Emergency room doctors worked frantically to clear her air passages and found blood clots blocking her throat. Her blood was already clotting, suggesting that her wounds had occurred some time ago. She was connected to a heart monitor, but a heartbeat could not be detected. The child was pronounced dead on arrival. The other 2 children were alive, but just barely. 8-year-old Christy had suffered 2 bullet wounds to the left side of her chest. One had exited her back, and one was still in her body. She registered no blood pressure, was quickly losing blood, and was on the verge of death. Her heart stopped as doctors worked to clear a blood clot from her lungs. They quickly shocked her heart and inserted a line to infuse more blood. Miraculously, her heart started to beat again, and she was rushed into surgery. The little blonde boy, Danny, was just a baby, just 3 years old. He was the only one of the children who was conscious when they arrived. He continued to cry softly as the doctors worked over him. They found a bullet hole a fraction of an inch from his spinal column. The bullet had been fired at close range. Their mother also had a wound. The nurse noticed a brightly colored beach towel wrapped around her arm from her elbow to her wrist. A bullet wound on the outside of her arm was almost halfway between the elbow and wrist. It was not life-threatening. It was cleaned, disinfected, and wrapped in a bandage. Diane Downs, age 27, was questioned by police about the shooting. She said she'd been driving home from a friend's house with her 3 children, Christy, age 8, Cheryl, age 7, and Danny, age 3, around 9:30 p.m. She said she was driving on Old Mohawk Road because the children liked to take the scenic route. Old Mohawk Road was located in a rural area and saw little traffic, especially in the evenings. Diane said she came upon somebody standing in the middle of the road. He looked like he needed help, she said, so she stopped the car and got out, taking the keys with her. As he approached, he told Diane he wanted her car, and she'd refused. The man she described as a bushy-haired stranger leaned into her car and began shooting at her kids. She tried to pull him away, but he shot her in the arm. She pretended to throw her car keys into the brush on the side of the road, and when he ran to retrieve them, Diane said she jumped in the car and drove off as fast as she could go to get help. Detectives who interviewed the young mother first struck by her odd behavior. Her kids were in surgery fighting for their lives after being shot by a psychotic stranger multiple times. Yet Diane Downs remained calm, not crying, not screaming, or hysterical. She recounted events almost matter-of-factly, even smiling and giggling at times. Her story seemed implausible as well. They were sightseeing at 9:30 p.m. in the dark? And why on earth would a woman with 3 small children not only pull over and stop for a male stranger, but also leave her car to approach him? It made no sense to them that an armed carjacker would shoot the children first, who were no threat to him, but didn't attempt to shoot Diane until she physically confronted him. Detectives watched as Diane was informed that her daughter Cheryl was dead. They saw almost no reaction from her at all upon hearing this news. She was then informed about the condition of her 2 other children. Doctors told her they were cautiously optimistic about Danny and explained the damage he'd suffered. "You mean it missed his heart?" Diane asked, sounding surprised. Christy was still in recovery after surgery when Diane turned to the doctor and said, "I know that Christy has suffered brain damage, and I don't want you to sustain her life." The doctor was outraged by her statement. That was very unusual, he said, and inappropriate. Tests had yet to show any brain damage. Christy would recover, but would have long-term issues with her ability to speak. She could not speak for several weeks due to her injuries, and doctors suspected the trauma she'd suffered from the violent crime exacerbated this condition. 3-year-old Danny survived his injuries, but was left paralyzed from the chest down and confined to a wheelchair the rest of his life. Investigators quickly determined that the forensic evidence did not match what Diane told them about the shooting. No other sightings of a bushy-haired stranger were found, even after an extensive search, nor were any footprints, tire tracks, or other evidence that suggested the presence of a second adult at the crime scene. More importantly, no blood spatter was found on the driver's side of the door, nor any gunpowder residue, which should have been detected if the stranger had shot the kids as Diane had described. The evidence all pointed to Diane Downs as the person who shot the children. They discovered that she'd lied when questioned about owning a gun, specifically a .22 caliber handgun, the type of weapon used in the shooting. Both her ex-husband Steve and her lover Nick told police that Diane did own a handgun. Nick told investigators he saw the .22 in the trunk of her car in the night before she left for Oregon. Investigators had found .22 caliber shell casings lying in blood in the back seat of her car. The gun was never found. However, investigators were able to match tool marks on the casings found at the crime scene with cartridges found in the Arizona home where Diane had lived. The matching tool marks proved to investigators that the bullets found in Arizona had been in the same weapon used to shoot the children. After an extensive investigation, Diane Downs was finally put on trial on May 10, 1984. She had been out on bail until February of 1984 when she was formally charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of assault in the first degree and booked into jail. While free, Diane met another man, had a fling, and became pregnant. She was far along in her pregnancy when she would finally appear before a jury. Prosecutors were worried that jurors would have difficulty convicting a pregnant woman on the verge of giving birth. But the prosecutor's star witness sealed Diane's fate. Almost exactly 1 year after she was shot, Christy Downs, now 9 years old, took the stand to testify against her mother. Christy looked very small and frail for her age and still had trouble speaking. She cried upon seeing her mother for the first time in 7 months. Between tears, Christy told the packed but silent courtroom her recollections from the night of May 19, 1983, when her mother had stopped the car on a dark country road. She described how Diane exited the vehicle, walked to the back, and opened the trunk. There was no one else around. She watched as her mother returned, pointed a gun at Cheryl, who was in the passenger seat, and shot her. She then described as her mother had reached over the back seat and continued firing, hitting Danny. Next, the prosecutor, Dan Hughey, asked Christy to describe what happened to her. He gently asked her, "Who shot you?" Sobbing, Christy answered, "My mom." Diane took the stand in her own defense and recited virtually the same implausible series of events she described when first questioned. She said that after the shooting she had panicked and prayed for her children to live, as she drove as fast as possible to the hospital. If she'd been in such a panic, Hughey asked, how was the wound on her arm so carefully wrapped and neatly folded in a towel? Diane had no answer. He also confronted her about the timeline. It just didn't fly, he said. It had taken her 18 minutes to go 0.8 of a mile. Would a mother who was frantically trying to save her children drive so slowly? Again, she insisted she'd gone as fast as she could and didn't believe that this could be true. Witnesses, however, confirmed it, testifying that they saw the small red car being driven at such a slow rate that they remembered it clearly. Investigators read from Diane's diary, in which she'd written about Robert Knickerbocker, her affair with him, and her desperate need to win him at all costs. She penned letters never mailed to Nick, in which she promised that if he moved to Oregon and married her, her kids would, quote, not be a problem. They will not be in the way, end quote. Investigators also presented a psychological assessment that had been done when Diane applied to be a surrogate. The psychologist reported that Diane could shut her emotions down at will, like flicking off a light switch. He also diagnosed her with histrionic personality disorder, a personality disorder characterized by excessive attention-seeking, including inappropriately seductive behavior and an excessive need for approval. People diagnosed as histrionic are described as lively, dramatic, and flirtatious, with exaggerated behavior and emotions, and who crave constant stimulation. One interesting observation: the term surrogate actually means substitute. Diane was an expert on substituting. She substituted the love she received from her children for the love she felt was missing in her marriage. She substituted the easy attention she received from men for the attention she thought she'd missed out on as a child. Finally, she attempted to substitute the lives of her children for the affection of one man. The jury returned its verdict on June 17, 1984. They found Diane Downs guilty of 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, and 2 counts of first-degree assault. Guilty on all charges. 10 days later, she gave birth to a baby girl who was placed for adoption after the biological father signed documents releasing his claim on the child. Diane was sentenced to life plus 50 years, with a 25 mandatory minimum sentence. The court rejected all of her appeals. It was determined by the parole board that her first eligibility to apply for release would not be until 2009. In 1987, Diane Downs scaled a prison fence and escaped. She was on the run for 10 days with the help of another prisoner's husband, whom she seduced and who'd agreed to provide her a hideout. She was caught, and 5 years were added to her sentence. The prosecutor, Fred Hughey, requested that Diane be sent to a more secure facility further away. He had good reason to fear another escape by Diane. Fred Hughey became fiercely protective of Diane's surviving children, Danny and Christy. With the consent of their father, Steve Downs, he and his wife adopted the children and were raising them just miles from the Oregon prison where Diane was incarcerated. His request was granted, and Diane was first sent across the country to New Jersey's Clinton Correctional Facility. She was later transferred to California and now serves her time in a California state women's prison. Diane Downs has gone before a parole board in 2010 and 2020 and was denied both times. She continues to claim she is innocent.
We exit the decaying mansion and make our way through a labyrinth of twisted hedges, where deceit and treachery lurk around every corner. At the heart of the maze, we meet Caitlin and Cassie, who share a hair-raising story from their podcast, PNW, Haunts and Homicides.
Usually, neither one of us can handle the other one's topic.
It's true.
Like today, that's why I won't be talking that much. You're going to hear a lot from Caitlin.
Yeah.
Just know the look on my face won't be pleasant.
That's fine. Many of us, if we choose to or are able to celebrate Mother's Day, we do that by sending our mom a card or maybe some flowers, if we're not close enough to actually visit. Since my mom lives in the area, we love to do brunch. It's a nice, relaxing way to do something everyone can enjoy for the occasion.
Ooh, I think of mimosas. Crepes.
But because this isn't a podcast about brunch, in May of 2015, not everyone would be able to celebrate the way they might wish, particularly in the somewhat rural Oregon areas of Colton and Estacada. Joshua Lee Webb was 36 years old at the time, living in a pole barn on his parents' property where the Webb family home was, doing odd jobs in the small community of Colton. His parents, Tina Marie and David Webb, were aware of only some of his struggles. He had problems with his vision, and though he was considered kind of a weirdo around town.
I'm a weirdo.
Not this kind of weirdo. He was generally thought to be nonviolent. However, concerning his mental health issues that they were perhaps unaware of, at least in part, they would not remain hidden forever. Later, a number of bizarre accounts about his state of mind and behavior would come to light. Like that he thought his girlfriend was trying to inject him with something in an effort to kill him. Then there was the truly bizarre claim that Fox TV was trying to own him.
What?
I'm not exactly sure what that means. He also believed that something in the family home wasn't quite right.
Him?
He was said to believe that there was a recording device present, something like a black box in the garage, just capturing all of the day-to-day goings-on.
That's like really extreme.
Eventually, his physical appearance began to deteriorate, not the least of which he had some very unusual-looking eyes, very unsettling. He was known to rub his head in a frustrated manner and complain that it felt like a squid was sucking on his head.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah, which of course sounds deeply unpleasant. His mother expressed concern to other family members about his mental health, and Joshua himself seemed to be aware that what he was experiencing was not normal, and at times he even expressed concern that he might harm himself or others.
He had that much self-awareness?
I feel like he was just feeling like he's very much out of control in his own body and mind. He voluntarily turned over firearms and destroyed knives that he had previously possessed. He went so far as asking his girlfriend to move back to the East Coast in order to keep her away from him. On May 13th, according to his father, they had a conversation before Joshua went to bed, and his father could tell that he was taking the breakup really hard. He didn't know any particular red flags or warning signs, though. Breakups are hard, so he really didn't give that conversation another thought.
Yeah, that sounds pretty legit.
Joshua took it a step further when he also falsely reported himself as a murderer to 2 different police agencies
in an effort to be taken into custody.
If that isn't the biggest cry for help.
On Mother's Day, fears that perhaps they couldn't admit even to themselves would burst forth into reality when Joshua's sister arrived at the Webb family home along with her children to celebrate with the family. She was immediately alerted to the fact that something was very wrong when she sadly found Joshua's dog stabbed to death in the kitchen.
No, what?
I know. I'm really praying that her kids didn't see that.
I hope not. That's so sad.
But it's not until she steps further inside the family home that the full depth of the horror she stumbled upon is realized. On Mother's Day, of all days, she would find her mother's decapitated body lying on the floor.
Oh, I just got freezing cold.
When she dials 911, at this point, there's already another call coming into dispatch from a local grocery store. The caller described a disheveled man entering the store wielding a bloody knife, and we are not talking about a butter knife. It was an 8-inch knife, so more like something you'd use to carve a turkey. But it gets worse. Witnesses would state that in his other hand appeared to be a severed human head.
No, we're not in Sleepy Hollow. This is not a headless horseman situation.
The man helped himself to a soda from the cooler, drinking it right then and there in front of the stunned employees at the store. He threatened one of the store clerks, gave chase, and then gruesomely began stabbing the man, Michael Wagner. The other employees immediately moved to subdue the attacker. They used duct tape to restrain the attacker before calling the police. I don't think most of you are likely having any trouble connecting the dots, but this was Joshua, who became completely catatonic at that point. He was taken to the hospital where he would remain in that state until a full 24 hours had passed. When he snapped back to reality, he said, "I had a nice nap," before providing a freely given confession to the horrific crimes of the previous day. This case did not go to a jury trial. It was pretty open and closed. He pleaded guilty by reason of insanity. His defense attorneys obviously wanted to see him sentenced to a mental institution rather than simply being incarcerated. 2 psychiatrists, one from each of the opposing legal teams, testified in his trial. They agreed that this was the correct course of action, as both confirmed a diagnosis of schizophrenia and psychosis. Joshua's father, David Webb, who hadn't been present at the time of his wife's murder, said, "My wife was wonderful. I've been married to her for almost 41 years. Joshua was our son. I never saw a problem. Evidently, there was one. I start crying every time I think about it."
Oh, that poor man.
As we emerge from the dark labyrinth, we find ourselves in a decrepit greenhouse where the wilted plants and shattered glass hint at a once thriving sanctuary of life. It's here that we meet Robin, who recounts a chilling tale from their podcast, The Trail Went Cold.
So there are a lot of diabolical mothers out there who have murdered or attempted to murder their own children, but I doubt you'll find too many crazier examples of this than Audrey Marie Hilley. I first learned about this story in 1991 when Unsolved Mysteries put together a special episode titled Diabolical Minds, which attempted to perform an in-depth exploration into the mind of a psychopath. And even though the saga of Audrey Marie Hilley was technically not an unsolved mystery per se, I can see why they decided to put together a lengthy segment about her story since, well, it's batshit insane. Audrey Marie Hilley, who went by her middle name, lived in Anniston, Alabama with her husband Frank and their children Mike and Carol, and even though Frank had a good job and they seemed like an ideal family, there was something much darker beneath the surface. Marie frequently cheated on her husband and spent money excessively, so she eventually decided to utilize a popular practice for psychopaths who experience financial problems: take out an insurance policy on a loved one and kill them. In May of 1975, Frank passed away at the age of 45 after a lengthy illness, and the official cause of death was ruled to be infectious hepatitis. At the time, no one had any inkling that foul play had occurred, but it turned out that Marie had taken out a $31,000 insurance policy on her husband right before his illness started. And Marie blew through that money fairly quickly and reached the point where she was heavily in debt and receiving calls from creditors. Well, in 1979, history would seemingly repeat itself when Carol, who was 18 years old at this point, became seriously ill and displayed a number of the same symptoms her father had. While Carol attempted to recover, her mother secretly gave her injections which were supposed to alleviate her nausea, but it only seemed to make things worse, and Marie told Carol not to tell anyone about these shots. While all this was going on, Mike decided to confront Marie about her financial issues, and this took place right before he ate a breakfast his mother had cooked for him. Well, lo and behold, Mike soon found himself becoming very ill, though he did recover. The big turning point occurred when Marie was arrested for passing bad checks, and it turned out she was attempting to use them to pay the premiums on a $25,000 insurance policy she had secretly taken out on Carol years earlier. So let this be a lesson for stupid criminals. If you're planning to murder someone for insurance money, make sure you at least have enough money on hand to pay for the policy. By this point, Carol was recuperating in the hospital, and Marie's arrest generated enough suspicion that physicians decided to perform new tests on Carol and discovered that she had a high level of arsenic in her system, which were the result of Marie's secret injections. Following this revelation, the authorities decided to exhume Frank's body, and sure enough, a new autopsy would uncover lethal traces of arsenic in his system. It now seemed obvious that Marie had poisoned her own husband and daughter in an attempt to collect on their insurance policies, and had likely poisoned Mike when she fed him breakfast. What's ironic is that Marie was described as being very kind and loving towards Frank and Carol while she was caring for them during their illnesses, even though she was the direct cause of said illnesses. Anyway, Marie was first arrested for the attempted murder of Carol before she was released on bail, and in January of 1980, she was finally indicted for Frank's murder. If things had ended there, this already would have been a crazy story, but the next development would send things into cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs territory. While she was out on bail, Marie fled to Florida and started a new life under the name Robbie Hannon. She soon became involved in a relationship with a man named John Holman and got married to him, but in the summer of 1982, Marie told John that she had to go back to her home state of Texas in order to seek treatment for an illness. Well, months later, John was taken by complete surprise when Robbie Hannon's twin sister Terry suddenly showed up at his door to inform him that Robbie had succumbed to her illness. No, you heard that right. Marie had actually gone to the trouble of changing her hair and losing some weight, and was now posing as her alter ego's non-existent twin sister. There are only 3 letters one can use to adequately describe this situation, and they are W, T, and F. Anyway, the facade eventually came tumbling down, and once the authorities learned that Robbie/Terry was actually Marie Hilly, she was finally captured and convicted on the charges of murder and attempted murder, and received sentences of life imprisonment plus 20 years. In February of 1987, Marie was granted a 3-day furlough from prison in order to visit John, who remarkably had still decided to stay married to her. But she used this opportunity to attempt an escape and spent the next few days hiding out in the woods. Unfortunately for her, the terrible weather and freezing temperatures caused her to succumb to hypothermia at the age of 53. So I guess it's only appropriate that the saga of Marie Hilly ended in a very unconventional fashion. So, happy Mother's Day, everyone, And if any of you out there have mothers who have been giving you secret injections and asking you not to tell anyone, run.
We leave the haunted greenhouse and enter a long-forgotten cemetery where the graves of mothers and children lie side by side, their stories etched into the crumbling headstones. Amidst the tombstones, we encounter Allison and Maggie from their podcast, Coffee and Cases.
The Christmas tree lights were gleaming, and they were illuminating the wrapped gifts sitting in the corner of the room in 23-year-old Stanley Anita Moore's home at 2249 Lafayette Street in Denver, Colorado, during the early morning hours of Monday, December 13th, 1971.
I'm also going to picture Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer playing in the background.
Yeah, all the Christmas movies coming on television. It's a Wonderful Life maybe playing. Yes. Now, that is probably, you're thinking, an odd name for a girl. Yes, she was personable and outgoing, but Stanley Anita was known as Stanita by her friends and family. So they just kind of merged the two names. Yes, she had gotten the unique name because of her dad, Stanley Moore. So he and Stanita's mother had already had 3 children, all girls. And now, in his wife's 4th pregnancy, he was desperate for a little boy. So when their 4th child was another girl, he decided to pass along his name to her anyway, calling her Stanley, after himself, Anita.
I kind of like it, though.
Mm-hmm. And her parents did go on to have boys, so he was a little premature in passing along the name. But yeah, it's very unique. And Stanita was fierce in a way that all of the best people are. Her younger brother, Stephen, recalled that Stanita was always his protector, and that if Stanita was near, no bully ever bothered him.
I love that.
Yeah, she would stand up to wrong no matter what form it came in. As an adult, Stanita was a hard worker in her role as a nurse aide at Presbyterian Hospital, but her greatest joy came in being a mother. Because again, she's a protector.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say she's going to be a mama bear.
Mm-hmm. She was an independent single mom to a little girl named Shandale. The night of Sunday, December 12th, 1971, into the early morning hours of Monday, December 13th, Stanita and her then 18-month-old daughter were at home, with Shandale already fast asleep, obviously, in her crib in another room. Which I guess I shouldn't say obviously, because she's 18 months old, so she could be waking up in the middle of the night. But she was asleep this night in the other room. And while we don't have many details concerning what happened that night, here is what we do know. And I will warn you, it is very little. And I'll explain to you why in just a moment. Someone entered Stanita's home that evening, though we don't know if that entrance into the home were forcible or if Stanita had let the person in. And while my research yielded no details as to the murder weapon, we do know that Stanita was strangled to death.
Oh.
I don't know if the choice to strangle with one's own hands versus using an instrument indicates anything about the perpetrator's psyche, but it would, at least to me, seem to indicate more premeditation if it were done with an instrument, like a shoelace
in the
or
moment
a rope.
by the hands.
Right. But again, with what little reports there are, none of them specify. But either way, the one silver lining is that Stanita's daughter, Shandale, was not harmed and had slept through the incident safely in her crib.
That is a silver lining for sure.
We do know that Stanita's family received a call in those early morning hours of December 13th, telling them that something horrific had happened and that they needed to rush to Stanita's home right away. But again, we don't know who called them to tell them that they needed to come over, who called the police. None of those details have been shared, but they couldn't believe what had happened. In the aftermath, Shandale was adopted by one of Stanita's sisters, and despite all of the horrors that had already happened in her young life, the family made it their mission to counteract those horrors with a continual outpouring of love over the years to Shandale. Now, as I just mentioned, there is a lot of information that is missing.
Mm-hmm.
Key questions still unanswered. Important details non-existent. This is partly due to the fact that the police files for the case no longer exist in their entirety.
Well, how did that happen?
So the family just recently discovered that, so much of the documentation has been missing, and they recently discovered that it has been missing for at least a decade.
Wow. I don't understand. We've talked about that on our show before, being discarded or things disappearing. I don't understand how that happens.
So here's how they explained it. In the 9 News Want to Know series, Doug Shepman, a spokesperson for the Denver police, stated that all that remains from the file is an autopsy report, a few handwritten notes from the crime lab, and a short entry of the crime in the police ledger. That's all that still exists. But that should be enough to at least let us know, I would imagine, some indication of how the strangulation
for sure
was enacted. The rest of the police files' whereabouts, though, well, your guess is about as good as theirs. According to Kevin Vaughn's article for 9 News that was published on February 24th, 2023, Stanita's sister was told in a discussion with detectives that the files had been destroyed in a fire at the police station years prior. However, spokesperson Shepman wrote an email to that same reporter, Vaughn, noting that, they may just as likely have been destroyed by water damage. They could still be available, but just accidentally misfiled somewhere else in the archives. Or even that a detective had checked out the files to work on the case years ago and just never returned them.
Okay, but I think at least that one you would have record of, the detective checking out files.
I would hope. As we know, a lot of cold cases have breaks because the stories remain in the public consciousness. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in Stanita's case, which received only a couple of articles at the time, including one that ran on April 9th, 1972, called Who Killed Mother of Sleeping Baby? And then nothing. Even now, there is little information to help keep the story alive, only a handful of articles. And with that, I've pretty much given you all of the information that has been shared.
Wow.
That is why you, as the listener, are even more important. Just because we don't have a lot of information to share doesn't mean that these stories don't need to be shared. Despite the bleak outlook, there can still be hope, even though it has now been more than 50 years since the crime occurred. In Kevin Vaughn's article in 9 News, Shandale said of her mother, quote, "I don't get to know her, but I wish I could have," end quote. That kind of loss is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
However, while Shandale doesn't have memories of her mother's kindness and love, she can feel the outpouring of it from others who are willing to share her mother's story and to push for answers. And answers are still possible.
As we wander deeper into the graveyard, we come across Nina, who tells a tale from her podcast, Already Gone.
There are a lot of terrible ways to die. Cancer, drowning, and Alzheimer's-related illness. But for me, the worst way to go is being burned alive. David Cole and Timothy Fowler were close friends from Deerfield, a small town in Lenawee County, Michigan. Deerfield is a very small town, and it's located about 60 miles southwest of the city of Detroit. In the spring of 1982, David and Tim were nearing the conclusion of their sophomore year of high school. The two spent a lot of time together, and they loved working on cars. Their dream was to open an auto shop after high school, a place where they could earn money doing what they loved. Their families described the boys as good kids who stayed out of trouble. Saturday, May 8, 1982, the day before Mother's Day. David's mom and stepdad are off to West Virginia. They're visiting relatives. David invited Tim over to spend the night at his parents' farmhouse just a few miles outside of Deerfield. But both David and Tim's parents were reluctant to allow a friend to stay over because of the lack of parental supervision. However, the boys were persistent, and their parents gave in. Tim went to David's farmhouse for the night. But on Mother's Day, May 9th, at approximately 12:45 a.m., firefighters are called to the farmhouse. When they arrive, the wooden structure is engulfed in flames. When the fire is extinguished and the smoke clears, a horrifying discovery is made. The bodies of David and Tim are found on the first floor, locked inside of a windowless bathroom. The boys were still dressed in street clothes, leading investigators to believe that they were awake when the fire started. Evidence at the scene made it look like a person or persons came to the home and forced the boys into the bathroom, locking the door from the outside, trapping them in a small, windowless room. This person or persons then poured gasoline on the floor of the home and lit a match. The gasoline appeared to have come from a can that was usually kept out in the barn. During their investigation, officers found the nearly destroyed can in the remnants of the fire, along with the bodies of Tim and David. A 1983 story in the Citizen Patriot newspaper reported that gasoline was poured in front of the door and ignited, but more recent stories claim that the fire started in the kitchen, which was adjacent to the bathroom. The farmhouse where the boys lived and died was older, made mostly of wood, and the first-floor bathroom was part of an addition to the home. Thus, the lack of windows and the strange door setup where it locked from the outside. When the bodies of the boys were recovered, investigators learned that one of the boys had lowered himself into the bathtub, filling it with water in an attempt to survive the blaze. The fiberglass tub melted around him, leaving investigators with a chilling tableau. When I initially covered this horrific double murder on the podcast in April of 2019, it's episode 114 if you're interested in an in-depth look at the case, I spoke with Kim Spencer, the younger sister of Timothy Fowler. She believes that locals committed the murders. Perhaps kids from a neighboring high school were involved. But back in 1982, at the time of the blaze, police interviewed teenagers from the nearby town of Petersburg, but the interviews did not move the case forward. Detective Kevin Greca of Lenawee County Sheriff's Department is the investigator in charge of this case, and he told the press that he developed various scenarios leading to the fiery death of the boys. But these scenarios generally come back to a disagreement over a girl or a dispute over drugs. Tim's sister said that he was not a drug user, but it's possible that he and David were targeted to send a message to someone else. Listeners, it's my understanding that some of the people police looked at in this case have since passed away, and that another potential suspect is in prison on charges unrelated to the Mother's Day murders. Police believe that even today there are people in the area with knowledge of who started the fire that led to the deaths of 2 children. With the right information, Detective Greca is confident that this case is solvable. If you have information about the Mother's Day murders, contact Detective Greca at the Lenawee County Sheriff's Office. He can be reached at 517-264-5364.
As we continue to explore the long-forgotten cemetery, we notice a secluded corner shrouded in creeping ivy and overgrown plants. Here, we encounter Alicia and Sierra, who share a chilling tale from their podcast, Twisted and Uncorked.
Hello, everybody. I am Alicia.
And I am Sierra.
And we have a story for you. In honor of this Mother's Day episode, we will be telling you about Ma Barker. She was the matriarch of the Barker Carpy gang that operated during the 1900s in Chicago. After her husband of 35 years leaves the family, Kate, Ma Barker, was left to her own devices and encouraged her son's criminal lifestyle. She became the alleged mastermind behind all of the activity that the gang got up to. Like all good stories, though, we have to go back to the beginning. Kate Barker was actually born Arizona Donnie Clark on October 8th, 1873, in Ash Grove, Missouri. Her parents, John and Emmeline Clark, affectionately called her Ari. Love the name Arizona and Ari and Emmeline. Just putting it
Same.
up there.
I was going to say the same.
In 1892, she married George Barker, and they went on to have 4 sons together. Herman in 1893, Lloyd in 1897, Arthur in 1899, and Fred in 1901. George would take any job that he could to support his large family, even if all of them weren't the best paying, in order to put food on the table. His jobs would range from a service engineer to a clerk. Kate stayed at home and cared for the boys and the home, and in 1910, one of George's jobs brought the family to Oklahoma. Hopefully it was better paying. Most people would focus on settling their roots, continuing to live the all-American dream, but this was right around the time that the Barker children started committing crimes in order to make money for the family. They were repeatedly involved in various gang activity, and the seriousness of their crimes would only escalate as they got older. In 1927, Herman died during a robbery shootout. He shot an officer point blank in the mouth and then turned the gun to himself, knowing full well that guns would soon be on him. That or he just didn't want to go to jail. The motive behind this action is unclear.
Goodness.
But after the death of Herman, Mr. Barker was crushed, and he couldn't stand that his family was living this way, with his wife Kate knowing all about it. He left the family to avoid connection with the criminal lifestyle of his wife and children. From 1928 to 1931, the Barker boys were in prison, and with no one to do her bidding for her, Ma Barker lived a life of poverty, often turning to sex work for income.
In 1931, when Fred Barker was released from prison, he founded the Barker Carpy gang with former prison inmate and friend Alvin Carpy. On December 9th, 1931, Fred and Alvin killed Sheriff Roy Kelly in Missouri during a robbery which forced Ma and the rest of the gang to flee Oklahoma. A manhunt ensued for Fred and Alvin, with Ma listed as an accomplice. When Arthur was released from prison in 1932, he quickly joined the gang. So no prison reform at all here from anyone, it seems.
Right, just from crime to jail to crime.
The group would be on the run, committing crimes throughout St. Paul, Minnesota, and Chicago, Illinois, over the next few years, looking over their shoulder constantly for police out for them. Tabloids began portraying Ma Barker as a ruthless killer that would plot their crimes out and protect the gang at all costs. From this point up until 1935, the gang was highly sought after by the FBI as well, for obvious reasons. On January 16, 1935, FBI swarmed Ma's house. A tip-off to police indicated that family was living in Ocklawaha, Florida. This resulted in a 4-hour shootout between the Barkers and police because they refused to surrender.
Jesus.
Alvin Carpy and 2 of the Barker boys had left the house 3 days prior for a job, leaving Ma and the youngest of the boys, Fred, alone in the house at the time of the shootout. Once the smoke cleared, both Ma and Fred were dead. Arthur Barker and Alvin Carpy continued the gang despite all of the losses they had experienced thus far, and in November of 1935, the boys robbed a mail train in Ohio. In January 1936, postal inspectors found Alvin Carpy hiding out in New Orleans, and he surrendered without a single shot being fired. Clearly, he thought better of his next moves after what happened to Ma and Fred. After this, the Barker-Carpy gang was finally dismantled.
Finally, in the shadows of an ancient crypt, we meet Josh. Josh is my brother, and together we are going to share a terrifying tale of a mother's dark deeds from a podcast we do together, Mystery Inc.
Well, Shane, we have a story about a mother who gave birth to a legend, yet treated her like a machine, programming her daughter to work herself into an early grave. We have all seen Dorothy skipping along the yellow brick road to find her way back home in The Wizard of Oz. Joined by friends, she wants nothing more than to go back home to her loving family. If you know about the fabulously tragic life of Frances Gumm, or her stage name, Judy Garland, I bet she would have opted to stay over the rainbow. Legends never die, but they often grow from unnourished soil. Judy Garland was, is, and will always be mother. But let's learn about the horrible woman who gave birth to her.
An ex-vaudeville actress turned bitter wife and mother who basically sold her daughter to a studio. Her name was Ethel Marion Milne. Without her, we would never have met our beloved Dorothy. But maybe Frances would have lived a longer, happier life without the trauma from her mother remaining with her until her early demise. Frances was born the youngest of 3 daughters, to Frances Gumm and Ethel Milne. When the couple found out they were pregnant for the 3rd time, they panicked due to the financial cost and sought to abort the fetus. After being unable to find someone to do the procedure, the couple, desperate, took matters into their own hands and did everything they could to cause a miscarriage. They already had 2 girls, and their relationship was rocky, and they often separated. Their efforts went in vain, though, as Frances Gumm was born on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. She quickly became the family favorite, as even at a young age, she had a star presence about her.
Ethel had all of her daughters performing as soon as they could walk. Judy first began appearing on stage at the age of only 2. This was before child labor laws, but they still wouldn't have applied to the poor girls. Family businesses, entertainment, and paper delivery are, let's say, more than lax about the exploitation of child labor, still to this day. In 1926, the family moved to Lancaster, California for 2 reasons. One was they were hopeful that they could launch the motion picture career of the sisters, who eventually began using the stage name, the Garland Sisters, as their surname, Gumm, just wasn't glamorous enough. The second reason was to escape the increasing rumors that Judy's father was gay. Well, that explains her panache. By the time Judy was 10, her mother began to increase her workload. It was clear to Ethel that all of her hopes lay with her youngest daughter. Ethel began putting all 3 girls on amphetamines to make them wake up and work. Then she would give them sleeping pills to make them shut off for just a few lucky hours of rest. Judy said that her mother used to threaten to hurt her if she didn't perform, even when she was sick. Ethel would force her to go out on stage. Judy also stated that she only felt loved when she was singing.
In 1935, Judy's father, Francis, fell ill due to meningitis and died in the hospital, leaving the girls alone with the will of their horrible mother. That made Ethel increase her efforts to push her girls to stardom even more. When she began forcing Judy to audition, studio executives were extremely critical of her physical appearance, and Ethel started forcing their wishes upon her daughter. They made her stick to a strict diet and weight loss pills to prevent her from gaining any weight. You know, in The Wizard of Oz, she has little inserts in her nose to give it a better shape. Eventually, she would be put on a diet of black coffee, chicken broth, and cigarettes, all with her mother's approval. By the time Judy graced our screens as the girl in the ruby slippers, she had already appeared in several films. But Oz is what launched her into fame. For a mother living vicariously through her daughter, it would have been wonderful. Ethel didn't care about her daughter at all, only keeping her new feeling of finally having fame.
Poor Judy was in constant search for plain human kindness. By 1941, she had married her first husband and quickly became pregnant. Judy was ecstatic about it and grateful for the opportunity to have someone to love and to love her unconditionally. Sadly, though, studio executives didn't think being pregnant suited their carefully crafted image of the beautiful virgin that was in Judy, and told her mother to convince her to abort it. Judy refused, but her mother still held so much power over her that she went to her home, made her get in the car, and drove her to have the procedure. She was now in her 20s and a married woman, but the constant neglect from her own mother held so much power over her that she gave up the one thing she wanted most in the world: love. Throughout her life, Judy was married 5 times and had 3 children whom she loved and adored. Liza Minnelli still speaks so lovingly of her wonderful and loving mother.
Judy's stardom glowed and dimmed several times throughout her short life. Before she died, she had begun a stage revival and received standing ovations each night. It appeared that she was back and better than ever. All of that attention must have brought up some of her old demons, because she began to substance abuse again. The old habit her mother had given her as a child was something she just couldn't beat. And on June 22nd, 1969, Judy Garland was found dead of an overdose in the bathroom of her rented home in London. Succumbed to the addiction that her mother had given her. Her body had been worn out from the brutal conditions that Judy had grown accustomed to from the age of 2. Ethel Marion Milne died 16 years before her daughter in 1953. She was living alone and working in the office of a factory. Her body was found in the parking garage by a fellow employee. She had suffered from a heart attack on her way into the office and was found on her knees, leaning against a car.
Ethel had let a studio basically have all ownership of her daughter, from appearance to when she could have a child. Given her the addiction that ultimately ended her life, forced her to abort a wanted fetus, abused her into performing, mentally and emotionally scarring her forever. And that's just all the stuff we know about. The story of Judy Garland is most definitely a sad one. I had known that the studio had owned her pretty much, but it never occurred to me to think about how her own mother treated her until now. As I watched The Wizard of Oz as a kid, Dorothy seemed like an adult to me and so happy. It goes to show you the phenomenal acting ability Judy possessed, making the whole world fall in love with her, all while being abused and unloved by her own mother. There's no business like show business.
Our journey through the hidden recesses of motherhood comes to an end, leaving us with haunting memories and chilling tales. As we part ways, remember to cherish the love and sacrifices of the mothers in your life. But never forget that beneath the surface, darkness can lurk. Thank you for joining us on this spine-tingling adventure. And a special thanks to all of our talented podcaster friends for sharing their eerie stories. Remember, all the podcasts you heard are listed in the show notes in order of appearance. Go take a listen. Stay vigilant, dear listener, and we'll meet again in the shadows of our next macabre journey.